Hey, my name is Will Greer. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a land surveyor for a small firm called Meridian Survey Group out of an office on the north edge of Lexington, Kentucky. What land surveying is, at its most essential, is this. I establish the precise boundaries of things. I go to a parcel of land, a residential lot, a commercial property, a right-of-way, a disputed boundary between neighbors who have stopped speaking to each other, and I determine, using instruments and records and the accumulated history of every survey that has been done in that area before mine, exactly where one thing ends and another thing begins. I set monuments. I produce a plat. I sign my name to a legal document that says, this is where it is, this is how large it is, and this is where the line falls. The work is foundational in the most literal sense. Nothing gets built without it. Nothing gets bought or sold or divided without it. The surveyor is the person who has to be right before anyone else can proceed, and whose name appears on the instrument and nowhere on the building. I have found, over the years, that this suits me. I do not need to be on the building. I need the building to be in the right place. My grandfather surveyed in eastern Kentucky for 35 years, and my father surveyed until his knees gave out at 58. And I am the third generation in a profession that has changed its instruments completely in my lifetime. I use GPS and total stations and software that would have been incomprehensible to my grandfather, and has not changed its fundamental nature at all. You are still establishing where things are. The precision has improved. The task has not. I have been with Meridian Survey Group for 7 years, since I got my license at 24. I work primarily residential and small commercial, boundary surveys, topographic work, construction staking. I spend most of my working days outside, which I prefer. Moving across parcels of land with my equipment and my notes, reading the physical record of what the land has been, the old fence lines, the tree blazes, the iron pipes that previous surveyors set in the ground decades ago, and that I find with a metal detector and my own understanding of where they would logically be. The land holds its history. You just have to know how to read it. I live in a 2-bedroom house on Manchester Street in Lexington that I bought 3 years ago, and which I am slowly making what I want it to be, which is a project I am not in a hurry about. I have a shop in the basement where I do woodworking, which is the hobby I have had since I was 14, and which is the closest thing I have found to surveying in the way it uses the same part of my brain, the measurement, the precision, the satisfaction of a joint that fits, because you took the time to fit it. I have a dog named County, which is short for county line, named for the kind of boundary I set more than any other. I wake up at 5:30, because field work starts early or the day gets too hot. I make coffee. I am at the job site by 7 most days, or at the office when the work is desk work. I come home by 5. I cook something adequate. I am in the shop by 7. I go to bed by 10. On weekends I run, I read, I work on the house. My social life is real but unhurried. I have a crew of guys from the profession, surveyors and engineers I have worked alongside for years. And we have dinner a few times a month and argue about equipment and road conditions and the specific failures of county records offices in rural Kentucky, which are considerable. I have a neighbor named Harlan on the left side who is 73 and who brings me vegetables from his garden in summer and who I repay by being available when something needs fixing. I have a friend from college named Denny who lives across town and who I see most Sundays. I do not have a complicated romantic history. I had a relationship for 2 years in my late 20s that ended when she moved for a graduate program, and we understood that the distance was not something either of us wanted to manage. It ended well. I have not been in a relationship since, which is a period of roughly 3 years, and which I have accepted as the shape of things without particularly examining why the shape had settled that way. The reason, which I understand in retrospect, is this: I am very good at seeing other people clearly. I notice things, small things, the things at the edges of the room that most people walk past. A person sitting alone. A situation that requires something. I have been paying this kind of attention my whole life, and I am practiced enough at it that it looks like kindness, which it is, but it is also a direction. I look outward. Always outward. And I have developed over 31 years a significant blind spot for being looked at myself. I do not register when someone is paying attention to me. I do not know how large a space I take up in other people's thinking. The irony of being someone who measures the boundaries of things for a living is that I have never been able to locate my own. This matters for what happened on Christmas. I should explain Christmas first. My mother is in Lexington, in the house on Winding Creek Road where I grew up, and my sister is in Nashville. And the plan every year is that my sister drives up on Christmas Eve and we spend the day together. That is the plan. What happened this year is that my sister's youngest had a fever of 103 on the 23rd and could not travel. And my mother drove to Nashville instead, and I spent Christmas morning in the house on Manchester Street with County, and a cup of coffee, and the specific feeling of a day that was supposed to be one thing becoming another. I was fine. I want to be clear about this. I am not someone who requires Christmas to be a particular shape in order to get through it. I made a good breakfast. I called my mother. I took County for a long walk. I worked in the shop for 3 hours on a cabinet I was building for the kitchen. I was fine. At 2 in the afternoon, I drove to Harlan's house with a plate of food I had made. I had cooked more than I needed, which is what happens when you cook for one and forget to adjust. And Harlan answered the door and looked at the plate, and then at me, and said he had eaten, but that he would take the food, and I could tell from the state of his kitchen that he had not eaten much. I sat with him for an hour. We talked about his garden plans for spring, and about the survey I had been working on, and about the weather. He asked about my mother, and I told him about my sister's child and the fever. He told me about his son in Cincinnati who had called in the morning but not visited, which he reported as a fact rather than a complaint, in the way that people report things they have made their peace with. When I got up to leave, he said, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," I said. "Most people don't," he said. He meant most people do not come. I said the food would keep and that I would check on him tomorrow. He said he knew I would. That was all. I drove to the Kroger on Nicholasville Road to pick up a few things I had run out of, because Kroger is open on Christmas and I needed coffee, and I needed to be somewhere that was not the house yet. The store was quiet in the specific way of a grocery on Christmas. A few people like me supplementing, and a few people who looked like they did not have anywhere else to be, and the staff who were working because they were the ones who had drawn the short straw or the ones who needed the holiday pay. I was at the end of the coffee aisle when I saw her. She was sitting on the bench near the front of the store, the bench that is there for people waiting for prescriptions or for a ride, in a coat that was too light for December, with a small purse on her lap, and a bag of groceries beside her that did not look heavy. She was very still. She was not looking at her phone or at the store. She was looking at the middle distance with the specific stillness of someone who has nowhere to be and has made her arrangements with that. She was in her mid-70s, I thought. Small, white hair cut short. Her hands were folded on the purse with the particular tidiness of someone who was raised to keep things neat regardless of the circumstances. I stood in the coffee aisle and I watched her for a moment. I almost went to the checkout. My basket had what it needed. It was Christmas. She was fine. Presumably there was nothing specifically wrong. But there was something in the way she was sitting, the quality of her stillness, the precise way her hands were folded, the coat that was not warm enough, that read as something other than simply waiting for a ride. It read as a person who had come to a Kroger on Christmas afternoon because the Kroger was open, and her apartment was not open in the way she needed it to be on this particular day. I put the coffee in the basket, and I went and sat down on the bench beside her. "Merry Christmas," I said. She looked at me. She had the blue eyes of someone whose face had been kind for a long time. She was surprised that I had sat down, not alarmed, just surprised. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Waiting on a ride?" I said. "My groceries aren't heavy," she said. "I walk. I just like to sit for a moment before I go back out in the cold." "I'll sit with you," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at the store. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. We sat together for 20 minutes. Her name was Dorothy Crane. She was 77, a widow of 11 years, living in the Kenwick neighborhood in an apartment she had moved to after the house became too much. She had a daughter in Louisville who had called that morning, and a son in Seattle who had sent a card. She told me this in the plain factual way that people use when they have already processed the feelings and are on the other side of them. She told me about her husband, who had been a high school principal and who had died on a Tuesday in February with very little warning, and about the winter after, which she described as the hardest season she had ever been through, and also the one that showed her what she was made of, which, she said with the quiet certainty of a woman who had survived the proving. She asked about me. I told her about the survey work, and about my grandfather, and about county, and about the cabinet in the basement. She asked good questions. She had the quality of someone who had spent decades listening to other people, students, parents, the particular community that forms around a school, and who had not lost the skill. After 20 minutes, she said she should get home before dark. I offered to drive her. She looked at me with the blue eyes. "You're kind," she said. "It's on my way," I said, which was not entirely true but was close enough. She let me drive her. 4 blocks. I carried her groceries up the stairs to her apartment on the second floor of a building on Kenwick Avenue, and at the door she took the bag and looked at me with the specific expression of someone about to say something they have decided to say. "You're the first person to notice me in years," she said. "Not since Harold died. People look past me now. I think I've become the kind of person who is easy to look past." She paused. "You didn't look past me." I did not know what to say for a moment. I thought about Harlan, and about the food he had not eaten, and about the coat that was too light, and about how much of the world happened in the places that people walked past without seeing. "You're not easy to look past," I said. "You're the kind of person people should pay more attention to." She looked at me for a moment. Then, she said, "Come back and see me sometime." I said I would. I drove home in the December dark, with County waiting at the door and the shop in the basement, and the cabinet half built on the workbench. And I thought about Dorothy Crane, and about what it meant to become invisible to the world that was supposed to see you. And I thought about my grandfather and my father, and about the work of establishing where things are, the foundational work, the work that makes everything else possible. The work whose name appears on the instrument and nowhere on the building. I thought about Harlan saying most people don't come. I thought about what it would mean to be a person who came. Dorothy had mentioned, in the 20 minutes on the bench, a name, her neighbor across the hall, a woman named Abby, who checked on her sometimes, and who worked at the hospital. She mentioned it in passing, the way you mention someone you are grateful for without wanting to make too much of the gratitude. I went back on the 27th. I brought a small thing, shortbread I had made, because I make shortbread at Christmas, and had more than I needed. And I rang Dorothy's bell, and she opened the door and looked at me with the blue eyes and said, "I hoped you would come back." We had tea. We talked for an hour. She showed me photographs of Harold, who looked, in the photographs, like the specific kind of man who had spent 30 years being responsible for other people's children and had been good at it, and had known he was good at it without making anything of the knowing. She showed me photographs of her daughter and her grandchildren, who were 8 and 11, and who visited twice a year. As I was leaving, the door across the hall opened, and a woman came out carrying a tote bag and a set of keys, clearly on her way somewhere, and stopped when she saw me. She was about 29, dark hair in a braid that was coming loose from the morning, a coat on over what looked like the end of a long shift, the specific tiredness of someone who has been paying attention to other people for 12 hours and is now going to the grocery before she can go home. She looked at me standing in Dorothy's doorway, and at Dorothy beside me, and at the shortbread tin in my hand. Dorothy said, "This is Will. He sat with me at the Kroger on Christmas. This is Abby. She's a nurse at UK. She looks after me." The woman looked at me. "You sat with her at the Kroger," she said. "He drove me home," Dorothy said, "and brought shortbread." The woman looked at the shortbread tin, then at me. Something shifted in her expression that was too quick for me to read and was gone before I could name it. "Abby Marsh," she said. "Will Greer," I said. She was already in the hall, already in motion. She had somewhere to be. She said it was nice to meet me, and that she was glad Dorothy had company, and she was at the stairwell before the sentence finished. Dorothy, behind me, said quietly, "She works too much." "She seems like good people," I said. "The best," Dorothy said. "She's been alone since she moved in 2 years ago. She brings me soup when I have a cold. She came Christmas morning before her shift." Dorothy looked at the stairwell where Abby had gone. "She doesn't know anyone thinks about her. She's like you that way." I drove home thinking about what Dorothy had said. She doesn't know anyone thinks about her. I sat with that for the rest of the evening. I went back to Kenwick Avenue on New Year's Eve, not to see Abby, to see Dorothy, who I had said I would visit again, and whose company I had found in the weeks since Christmas to be the specific kind that makes you think more carefully than you did before. Abby was in the hallway when I arrived, coming home from what was clearly another long shift. The same coat, the same tote bag. The braid again, but a different day's version of coming loose. She stopped when she saw me on the stairs. "Dorothy mentioned you'd been back," she said. "I said I would be," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "You meant it," she said. "I usually mean things I say," I said. She had the quality, I noticed, of someone who was listening to something other than the surface of what was being said, not suspiciously, but with a depth of attention that registered more than most people registered. Her eyes were dark and very steady, and they had the slightly faraway quality of someone who was also, underneath the conversation, thinking about something else, and the something else was this conversation. "Dorothy talks about you," she said. "What does she say?" I said. "She says you see people," she said. She said, "He sees people, Abby. Not everyone does." I did not say anything for a moment. "I should go in," she said. "She'll be waiting to tell me you're here. I'll let you get past me," I said. She smiled, brief, real, the kind that appears before you decide whether to show it. She went past me in the stairwell. She knocked on Dorothy's door. Dorothy opened it and looked at both of us and said, "Good. Come in, both of you." We had tea, the three of us, for an hour. Dorothy talked, and we listened, And sometimes we talked to each other across the table, while Dorothy watched us with the expression of someone who has been watching people for 77 years and knows what she is looking at. When Abby left, she said it was nice to see me again, which was the standard thing to say, but she said it in the specific way of someone who means it more than the words carry. I stayed another 20 minutes with Dorothy. When I left, Dorothy said, "She asks about you." I looked at her. "When she comes to check on me," Dorothy said, "she asks how you are, what you've been doing, whether you've been back." Dorothy folded her hands on her lap. "She doesn't know I'm telling you this." I thought about Abby in the stairwell, the braid coming loose, the steadiness of the eyes. She doesn't know anyone thinks about her. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I'm 77, Dorothy said. "I don't have time for people to be careful when they don't need to be." In January, I started bringing 2 portions of whatever I cooked on the nights I came to Kenwick Avenue. This was practical. I cooked more than I needed anyway, and the portions were not much extra work. And it was also not only practical, and I understood that about it from the first time. Abby was not always home. Sometimes she was working, and the food stayed with Dorothy, and sometimes it went into the hallway, and I knocked on Abby's door and she answered in the tiredness of post-shift and accepted the container with the specific grace of someone who knows what is being offered and is choosing to receive it. We talked in the hallway. In these encounters, not long conversations, she was tired. I was aware of that. And I did not want to use her tiredness as a context for things that deserved better. But enough to accumulate. I learned things. She had grown up in Harrodsburg, 40 miles southwest, daughter of a postal worker father and a librarian mother, which she described as the ideal combination for someone who needed to learn early that both information and its delivery mattered equally, and that neither was valuable without the other. She had gone to UK for nursing, stayed in Lexington, been at the hospital for 4 years. She had a quality of attention that I recognized from my own work, the ability to walk into a room and immediately read what was actually happening in it, below the surface of what was presented. She had gotten this, she told me once, from the emergency department, which trained you out of taking the presenting complaint at face value. "What's under the presenting complaint?" I said, about a case she was describing in general terms. "Usually something the person was too scared to say directly," she said, "or something they didn't know was the real thing." I thought about that in relation to myself and kept the thought to myself. She had a dry humor that appeared in the pauses between serious things, the way certain plants grow through cracks in stone, not because the conditions were ideal, but because the impulse was strong enough to find the available space. She told me once, in the hallway, that she had learned to tell the difference between patients who were going to be all right and patients who were not going to be all right by whether they laughed at her jokes. I asked what happened with patients who didn't laugh because they didn't find the jokes funny. She said those patients were fine. They just had better taste. She said this with complete seriousness. I laughed. She went inside. On a Sunday in mid-January, I brought soup, which I had made on Saturday with the specific intention of bringing it, though I told myself I had made too much. She answered the door in the particular way of someone who had been asleep and was not embarrassed about it. Hair loose, the end of a nap on her face, and she looked at the container and then at me and said, "Is it lentil?" "Red lentil," I said. "Good," she said. She took it. She looked like she was going to close the door and then didn't. "Come in," she said. "I'll make tea." I came in. Her apartment had the specific order of someone who did not have time to be tidy and was tidy anyway, which I recognized as a form of discipline. Books were in rows. Shoes were paired at the door. There was a plant on the windowsill that was thriving, which told me about the quality of her attention. On the kitchen table there was a notepad with what looked like a letter half written, which she turned over without calling attention to turning it over. We had tea. We talked for an hour in the way that is different from the hallway conversations, less provisional, less aware of its own duration. She told me about a patient she had been thinking about, in the way nurses talk about patients without identifying them. A man in his 80s who had come in for something routine and had no one listed as emergency contact, and who had held her hand without asking while they waited for test results, and who she had thought about on the drive home and on the walk to Dorothy's that evening. "What did you do?" I said. "I held his hand," she said. "That was the job in that moment." "Was it in the job description?" I said. "No," she said. "But neither are most of the things that matter." She looked at her tea. "Most people come in with a presenting complaint," she said, "and underneath the presenting complaint is the actual thing, and underneath that is usually the same thing. They don't want to be alone in whatever is happening." She paused. "I got into emergency nursing because I thought I was good in crises. I am. But what I'm actually good at is the other part, the part where the crisis is over and someone is sitting in a room and trying to understand what just happened." "That's what you do with Dorothy," I said. "She was here when I moved in," she said. "She brought me cookies. Nobody had ever done that before, in any place I've lived. I didn't know what to do with it." She looked at the window. I came back the next day to return the plate, and she asked me in for tea, and I stayed 2 hours, and I've been coming back ever since. "You're good at staying," I said. She looked at me. Something in the look was checking for accuracy in the way she checked for accuracy with presenting complaints. "So are you," she said. I looked at the notepad she had turned over. She saw me looking. "A letter," she said, "to my mother. I write letters because she prefers them to emails. I've been writing it for 2 weeks. "Why 2 weeks?" I said. She was quiet. "Because the honest version of the letter is harder to write than the version I keep starting," she said. "I keep starting with how things are and ending up somewhere I'm not sure I'm ready to send." I did not ask what the harder version said. I understood that she had told me enough by saying that much. I finished the tea. I said good night. I stood at her door for a moment. "The soup was good," she said. "Will you make it again?" "Yes," I said. She nodded. She closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment. I thought about the letters she had been writing for 2 weeks. I thought about the things that were harder to say in the honest version. I went home and I thought about it for the rest of the evening, and I understood something I had been not understanding for a month, which was that I had been bringing food and calling it practical for long enough that the practice had become its own kind of honesty. And I was going to need to say it directly before the indirection became a habit that was harder to break. She was, I understood over January, someone who had been taking care of people for so long and so completely that the reverse, someone taking care of her, was a thing she did not know how to receive. Not because she did not want it, but because she had no practiced motion for it. She would start to accept something and then redirect it. She would acknowledge being tired and then immediately say she was fine. She had, as Dorothy had said, no idea that anyone thought about her. She was the person who came. She had always been the person who came. And nobody had come for her. This was the thing I was thinking about on a Tuesday evening in February, when I went to Kenwick Avenue with food and found a man named Carter Wells in the hallway. Carter Wells was standing outside Dorothy's door when I came up the stairs, and he was dressed in a way that announced his intentions before he opened his mouth. The good coat, the effort, the posture of someone about to make a case. He was 34, I later learned, a commercial loan officer at a bank downtown, and he had been introduced to Abby by a mutual friend and had apparently decided, without significant information about her schedule or her preferences, that showing up at her apartment on a Tuesday evening was a romantic gesture. Abby was not home. He had been knocking. He looked at me on the stairs and at the food containers I was carrying, and he said, "You here for Dorothy?" "Yes," I said. "You know Abby Marsh?" He said. "She's Dorothy's neighbor," I said. He looked at the containers. "You bring food?" "I cook more than I need," I said. He looked at me with the specific expression of a man assessing a rival he has not been warned about, doing the math in real time. Dorothy's door opened. Dorothy looked at Carter Wells, and then at me, and her expression was the expression of someone who has been watching people for 77 years and is watching them now. "She's not home," Dorothy said to Carter Wells. "She's working until 8. Carter Wells said he would wait. Dorothy said the hallway was not a comfortable place to wait, and that she could not invite him in as she did not know him. She said this with the mild finality of a woman who has been a principal's wife for 30 years and knows how to end a conversation. He left. Dorothy looked at me. "Come in," she said. "Inside, over the food I had brought," Dorothy said. "He came last week, too." She didn't answer. "I don't think she's interested. Has she said so?" I said. "She didn't have to," Dorothy said. "She brought me soup on Sunday, and she mentioned someone had been by, and the way she mentioned it was the way you mentioned something you're hoping will stop." I thought about Carter Wells in the hallway, about the good coat and the posture, about Abby coming home at 8 after a long shift to find the record of someone standing outside her door. When Abby came home at 8:15, I was still there, helping Dorothy with a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet that had needed attention for some time. I heard the door in the hall, and Dorothy said, "Go." I went to the hallway. Abby was at her door with her keys out, still in her coat, and she looked up when she heard my door, and she looked, briefly, the way people look when they are very tired and unexpectedly see something they did not know they needed. "Will," she said. "There was a man here earlier," I said. "Carter Wells. He was waiting for you. I thought you should know before you found the evidence of it." She was quiet. "How long was he here?" she said. 20 minutes, maybe," I said. Dorothy sent him away. She looked at her keys. Something moved in her expression that was not about Carter Wells. "Are you all right?" I said. "I'm tired," she said. "I've been tired for a while." She looked up at me, not physically. "The other kind, I know," I said. "I know you know," she said. "That's—" She stopped. She looked at her keys again. "Dorothy says you come every week." I said I would, I said. "She says you bring food. I cook more than I need," I said. "You don't," she said. "Dorothy told me you don't cook more than you need. She said you make extra." I looked at her. "She's 77, I said. "She doesn't have time for careful." Abby looked at me. Her eyes had the steadiness and the depth, and underneath them something that had been held carefully for a long time was making its way to the surface. "Will," she said. "Yes," I said. "I have been." She stopped. She tried again. "I notice things at work. I have to, for the job. And I have been noticing, since New Year's Eve, since we had tea with Dorothy, I have been noticing that you are the kind of person who sees people and does something about it." She looked at me. "And I've been wondering whether you see me." "I see you," I said. "How long?" she said. "Since the stairwell," I said. "The first time. The way you looked at the shortbread tin." I stopped, and then Dorothy told me you asked about me. And I have been bringing extra food for 4 weeks and telling myself it was practical. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else, and it had 3 weeks of Tuesday evenings in it. It wasn't practical, she said. No, I said. I crossed the hallway. I was going to say the rest of it, the 4 weeks, the specific quality of her presence. The thing Dorothy had said about both of us, not knowing anyone thought about us. But she put her hand on my face, the way you touch something you have been trying to find your way toward for a long time. And I understood that the rest of the saying could wait. I kissed her in the hallway on Kenwick Avenue. And it was not tentative, and it was not dramatic. It was the specific feeling of a thing arriving that had been patient about its arrival. And it tasted like the end of a long shift in shortbread, and the particular relief of being seen by the person you have been trying to see. She pulled back and looked at me. Carter Wells was wearing a very good coat, she said. He was, I said. That's all I'm going to say about that, she said. Fair enough, I said. She went inside. I went back to Dorothy's to say good night. Dorothy looked at me from her chair. Well, she said. Well, I said. She folded her hands on her lap and looked at the middle distance, with the expression of someone who has been watching people for 77 years and has gotten the outcome she was working toward. Harold would have liked you, she said. I did not say anything. I sat back down. We talked for another hour. 9 months after I sat with a lonely woman on Christmas, Dorothy Crane came to Sunday dinner. This was in September, the 3rd time. The first time had been in April, when I had invited her and Abby together on a Sunday when the weather was good enough to eat on the back porch, and Dorothy had come with the specific readiness of someone who had been hoping to be asked. She had met County and approved of him, and she had eaten more than she usually ate, and she had sat on the back porch in the September, early April warmth and looked at the yard and said, Harold would have done that fence differently. I said how. She told me. She was probably right. Abby moved to Manchester Street in June, which happened the way right things happen, incrementally and then all at once, her things appearing in the house in the way things appear when they have decided where they belong. She kept the apartment on Kenwick Avenue through July for the overlap, and visited Dorothy every week through the transition. Dorothy took the change with the equanimity of a woman who had earned the right to be glad for other people without losing anything herself. Harlan, on my left side, met Abby in April when she was in the front yard, and he was in his. He looked at her for a moment, and then he looked at me and said, She's a nurse? I said yes. He said, Good. I'm not as young as I used to be. He went back inside. I did not know how to explain that this was high praise from Harlan, but Abby seemed to understand it already. Denny met her on a Sunday in March. He is the friend who knew me longest, before Abby, and he is a history teacher, and he looked at both of us through dinner with the specific attention of a man assessing primary sources. At the end of the evening, he said to me in the parking lot, She finishes your sentences. I said I had not noticed. He said, You never notice the things that are happening to you. You only notice the things that are happening to other people. I said I was working on that. He said, I know. She's helping. He got in his car. He was right. She is helping. I think about Christmas sometimes. About the coffee aisle and the bench near the front of the store, and the woman in the coat that was too light, sitting with her hands folded the way she had been raised to sit, waiting for the cold to stop being what it was. I think about the moment I almost went to checkout. I think about the choice to sit down, which was not a complicated choice and did not feel like one at the time. It just felt like the obvious thing, the thing the situation required. I establish boundaries for a living. I determine where one thing ends and another begins. I set monuments in the ground so that the record of where things are survives whatever changes on the surface. The land holds its history if you know how to read it. I have spent my working life reading the edges of things. I have been slower to understand my own. Dorothy showed me what I was to Abby before Abby could say it. She is 77. She said she didn't have time for people to be careful when they didn't need to be. She has been right about most things. Abby comes for Sunday dinner now, which is what she has been doing since June, which is a fact and not the whole fact. The whole fact is that she is home, which is a different statement from the same words, and I know the difference, because I am someone who establishes precisely where things are. She is here. This is where she is. I sat down next to Dorothy Crane on a bench at a Kroger on Christmas afternoon, and the world shifted 2 degrees in a direction I had not been accounting for, and everything that followed was the consequence of a choice that did not feel like a choice, because it was simply what the situation required. Maybe that is how the most important things happen. Not in the dramatic moments, not in the decisions you agonize over, but in the small and unremarkable instance when you notice something that most people walk past, and you stop, and you sit down, and you stay. I noticed her. I sat down. The rest of it grew from there.